Good afternoon, my friends. We're going to do another installment of our studies looking at the transition from the tabernacle of Moses to the tabernacle of David. And so in this transition time, we see some different players that have become very pronounced. Well, there's another group of players that's kind of subdued. We're going to have to dig around to find evidence of these players, but eventually they will emerge from the shadows and show themselves to be important players in this time. So what we have is in the book of Judges, we went through that part, how the decline of the priesthood was truly affecting the spiritual condition of the people, of the nation Israel. And so there needed to be a change. There needed to be something different, something new that was going to bring the people back into a good communion with God. And so what's going to happen historically is tabernacle of Moses is going to fall by the wayside and become ineffective, and the tabernacle of David is going to be the preview for the temple that's going to be in Jerusalem. So that being said, there's a transition time, and there's times that people need to be ministered to. They need a grasp and a connection to God. And because we looked very early on that the people weren't communicating with God personally, then there needed to be some kind of representative people who was bringing the message of God to the people. So we're going to look at today evidence for the communities or the schools of the prophets. So here we go. We're going to start in Judges chapter 4, which we've looked at in depth with the story of Deborah, but we're going to look at it this time with looking for evidence that Deborah, the prophet, was not necessarily alone. So we're going to read Judges 4, 4, 5, and 6. So, now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the sons of Israel came up to her for judgment. And in verse 6, she will call out Barak to start the process of being delivered. So what we see here, there's two elements in her personality. One is that she's a prophetess. Okay, and that can happen on the scale of a person whose heart and mind is right with God, but doesn't necessarily know too much of the law of God. On the other hand, a judge has to be, according to the book of Deuteronomy, has to be very well and excellently versed in the law of God. So one might ask the question, where did Deborah get that education? Where did she learn the law of God? And perhaps she even had a copy of the law of God, because she's sitting under a palm tree and people are coming to her from hither and yon, and they're going to put before her their confrontation or their conflict with their neighbor, and she's going to work it out. So for one, being a prophet is going to be helpful if she can appeal to God for insight and wisdom, but that is not saying that she can do it without the law of God. So I'm stating most likely there's a place where you have access to the law of God, and you can actually learn the law of God. You don't be a judge without knowing the law of God. Okay, so that's number one. So number two, we're going to turn over to Judges chapter 5, and in chapter 5, Deborah and Barak will be singing a song, and it's a prophetic song. And so this isn't a normal thing for people to do. This is kind of coming out of a spiritual movement kind of thing. So we see Moses doing the same thing, doing a spiritual kind of song, as he's expressing himself, but these people don't know Moses. Perhaps they've been reading Moses and God is influencing them, but maybe there's another influence in their life. So we're going to see that when we finally find the school of the prophets, and we're not just looking for evidence, maybe they are already in the works teaching people about prophetic music. Well, that's just conjecture at this point. Well, let's just see if it adds up with other things. So the next thing we're going to look at is Judges chapter 6, verses 7 through 10. So in Judges 6, 7 through 10, there's the next story of deliverance, and this is going to be at the hand of Gideon, but there's a prelude to that. And so we've talked about this a little bit before, that in Israel this is like the fifth or sixth time they've been oppressed by a different nation, and so their country is in a total disarray. There's no way to call their country together. What they come together for is a war, and they fight, and then they go home, and then they have problems. And at the time of their deliverance, the deliverer will now tour the country, being a judge and settling the situations and problems that are occurring in the area. So the judge becomes a traveling judge, typically, and so the years that he's judging, he's traveling. This is the time when they're being oppressed. So travel is not an easy thing to do. So here's what happens. Verse 6, Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord. Okay, so Midian is ruling over them, and they're brought very low. Being low is a bad thing. So they can't travel, they're hunkered down, they're being defensive, they're hiding a lot, and so something needs to happen, and that happens in verse 7. Now it came about when the sons of Israel cried to the Lord on account of Midian. Okay, so they've done what maybe we should be doing, crying out to the Lord in maybe a collective way, concerted way, ongoing way. When that happened, that the Lord sent a prophet to the sons of Israel, and he said to them, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, it was I who brought you up from Egypt and brought you out from the house of slavery." Okay, so there's a man shows up. Well, the reality is Israel is a huge collection of cities surrounded by villages. Now, a city might be 2,000 or 3,000 people, but a village might be 100, might be 50. And so this kind of humanity in the way that it's set up, it would be darn near impossible for God to get that word out to everybody by just one man walking across Israel. In fact, that might take more than a year if he started in the north and ended up all the way in the south and went to every place. And so there's evil going on, and it's time for deliverance. And so the people are crying out, and if it's a year from the time they cried out and all of a sudden the deliverer comes forth, it makes you wonder, was God really have a hand in this, or does this happen naturally? So from the people calling out to God delivering, I imagine it's not a huge amount of time. So I read the Hebrew, and so this is how it goes. Thus to them, and who said of Israel, the sons to a prophet Yahweh. Well, that's the Hebrew. And we take the Hebrew, and they're going to try to make an English sentence out of it. But so this part about a prophet showed up, and he said to them, we don't know from this passage that it really actually says that. So let's listen to that again. Thus to them, and who said of Israel, the sons, to a prophet Yahweh. So it could mean that a prophet came to a group of people and delivered a message. But that doesn't mean another prophet wasn't delivering another message to another group of people. In fact, if you took this thing that happened, and a man having like a year's worth of work to walk to a village, and walk to another village, and then actually sleep, and then get up the next day and walk to a town and walk to a village. So instead of it taking maybe a year, if you split that into 30, it would only take a month, maybe even less, to get that word out all over Israel. So if there's a group of people that are prophets, then this would happen happen readily. So I'm not saying that this is proof, but it's another evidence that there might be a group of people out there doing this instead of just one person. Okay, so let's see, go to my next page. So now we're going to look at Judges chapter 11. So there's a man named Jephthah. Now, if you read all the information there is to read about Jephthah. Now, there's more information historically than just what's in the Bible, especially when it comes to Israel. There's a thing called I forgot the net. There's another thing that has a history of Israel in it, and it's something that's also studied. And it goes right along with the Bible. In fact, sometimes they're paraphrasing one another. But anyway, sometimes there's more background information than some of these other sources. So you have the Talmud, and it's somewhere in my notes. I'll tell you when I come across it. But there's another document that's studied in Israeli history. That's an ancient document. You'll find a little more background. Well, Jephthah actually was, because if you read the story in the Bible, he was rejected by his family, so he went somewhere else, and he was a man of importance there. Well, the importance he was he was a mercenary, and he was out there with a group of guys making a living, doing what those kind of guys do. And so when they wanted a deliverer, naturally they wanted a man who had those kind of skills. Well, that kind of man that has those kind of skills is not necessarily a learned or an educated man. But when Jephthah comes on the scene, Jephthah says to the king of Ammon, and if you read, let's see where we at here, Judges 11, 15 through 27, if you were to read that passage, you'll say, this guy knows his history. He knows it very well. In fact, it looks like he might have the document right in front of him, and he's quoting from it. And so he's writing a letter to the king of Ammon saying, hey, you guys don't have rights to stand against us for this property that we're living on. You can't make a claim on it, and the reality is we actually have more of a claim on your property than you have on us. But we showed you mercy. And so because of that, we're going to stand our ground, and we're going to ask God to be our defender in the midst of this, and we're going to come against you if we have to. So he makes this diplomatic connection to the king of Ammon, but it is very based on the actual history of Israel. And where did that man who's been a mercenary in another country come up with that kind of information? Well, obviously there's a place you can sit down with the documents and go through it and then review what happened historically, and then sit down and write out a realistic plea that might be held up in an international court that that country doesn't have any jurisdiction or any rights to the land of Israel. And so he does that. And I'm saying, well, there's obviously, because the Moses tabernacle system is completely broken down, that there's another place that you can get information about the Word of God. Okay? Well, there's one thing that other document, I wish I could remember the name of it, says that the sons of the prophets started out as kind of like school of scribes, so that they had to have copies of the Word of God, and there's only one way to do it, was to look at it and write it out, because they didn't have a printing press. And so they created this group of guys that would sit down and do that. So maybe every synagogue, they didn't have synagogues back there, but maybe every town, maybe there was some. Anyway, there was copies of the Word of God around, so you could look at it if you need to. Well, out of that came another community called the Schools of the Prophets, and that was what's the best way of learning the Word of God, other than writing it out and writing your own copy of the Word of God and studying that and showing other people that. So here we have something going on. So more evidence to the fact that there's a place to learn about the Word of God. Okay, so then we go to 1 Samuel 1:1. 1 Samuel 1:1 is the story naturally of Samuel being born, and we all learn that story in Sunday school. But when I was studying this, so one of the things that I do when I'm doing these deep studies is I will go to dissertations. So a person is going to get a PhD in divinity. A lot of times they'll dive into history, and so I was reading through one of these dissertations about this subject, and I came across somebody who stated that they had found Talmudic evidence that Elkanah, who was the father of Samuel, was a member of a school of prophets that numbered about 200 men. And so he found that reference and he used it, and I'm going, and that was one of the first things I came across. So I said, well, I'll see this over and over again, so I won't write it down. Well, I can't find it again because you know how much stuff is on the internet. But I did. I wrote it in my very notes that I was taking, that Elkanah was a member. Well, was there any evidence in the things that go on in that life? Well, Elkanah was married to Hannah, and Hannah's going to be the mother of Samuel. And so when she delivers Samuel to Eli, and we all know that story, and he's going to drop him off a little boy and come back every year with a new robe or a new coat. When that happens, the chapter 2 of Samuel is her song. She puts forth a song. Well, this song does not come from an unlearned person sitting in a little hut somewhere and taking a boy that just got raised in the country up to the tabernacle of Moses and being raised by the high priest. That's not what happened. This woman, if you look at chapter 2, it's called Hannah's Song of Thanksgiving. She's written a psalm. She's written a psalm, and if you read it, the psalm falls right in the same natural theme of other psalms that are written in the Bible. So, where did she get this understanding? Where did she get the information? Where did she get this process? Well, it's in the same pattern. Well, naturally, God gave it to her, but it's also in the context of something. Well, if her husband Elkanah was in a school of prophets, well, maybe the prophets back then were a little bit. They were bringing it home to the wives. Maybe they had some public things, and the wives were allowed to contribute or be a part of that. Anyway, this woman comes up with this amazing, like a Magnificat done by Mary or by Elizabeth. And so in fact, it's prophetic. She actually prophesies what's going to happen about 5-6 more chapters down the road. She prophesies exactly what's going to happen. And so that's just amazing that this didn't come out of the tabernacle of Moses. So something's going on behind the scenes that's producing this kind of expression about God in a prophetic song. Okay, so that's an indication. So then we go to 1 Samuel chapter 10. Well, 1 Samuel chapter 10, the cat's out of the bag. Okay, we're gonna see. So Samuel has talked to Samuel. Samuel made the same mistake that Eli did. He thought he could make his sons take his place. Well, he had the same problem Eli did, and it could be because he grew up in Eli's house and learned parenting skills from Eli. I'm convinced he should have stayed home a little bit longer and learned the parenting skills from his mom and dad. But that being said, his boys turned out just like Eli's boys, and they were not the kind of quality you would make a judge of Israel. But that's what Samuel was going to do. He was a prophet, but he was going to make his sons judges in Israel. Well, they turned out to be dishonest men, and the people of Israel said, "We want no part of this." And so, if the temple thing is gone down the tubes, and now you're putting these boys on top of us, we don't want a piece of that. So they're going to be asking for a king. And so, if everybody else has a king, maybe that's the answer. Well, it's really not the answer at this time, but it will be an answer when you got to find a king after God's own heart. But anyway, so God tells Samuel he's going to choose him king, and it's going to turn out to be Saul. Well, in this process, Samuel and Saul are having these conversations, and so in chapter 10, he's going to tell him something to go do something, and so we're going to start reading in verse 5 and 6. So this is instructions. This is just part of the instructions. You can go back and read the whole chapter later. Part of the instructions from Samuel to Saul. It says, "Afterward you will come to the hill of God, where the Philistine garrison is, and it shall be as soon as you come there to the city that you will meet a group of prophets coming down from the high place with harp, tambourine, flute, and a lyre before them, and they will be prophesying." In verse 6, "And the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you mightily, and you shall prophesy with them, and be changed into another man." So this is what Samuel is saying to Saul is going to happen to him as he leaves Samuel. Okay, pretty crazy process. But there's some things here. Well, who are these people coming down? A group of prophets. Now, this isn't the first day that a group of prophets came down from there, because Samuel knows, he knows where they are, and he knows that they're coming down and they're going somewhere. Okay, so he understands what's going on, and he knows where they've been. Well, there's a hill. Now, and so there's a little disagreement about where this hill is, because this hill's not too far from Gibeah. It could be the hill of Kiryat Jearim, where the ark is. It could be that hill, or it could just be a hill that the Philistines picked out as an outpost, and it's a high place. When high place means a couple of things in the Old Testament. One, it's a place to go seek God on a high place, like some of us like to go to the mountains, or sometimes it's a very idolatrous high place. So a place being high does not necessarily mean idolatrous. Okay, so let's get that in our mind. But this place is high, and it is being used for some kind of God study. Okay, so this could be Kiryat Jearim, or this could be close to Gilgal, but it's a hill in a hilly area. And these hills tend to be bald. Okay, so that means it's a good place for an outpost, so you can see a long way. So that's where these guys are coming from. And they're singing and playing music. Okay, now the fact there's 4 different kinds of instruments, and they're obviously playing together, okay, and they're doing some kind of musical prophesying. It means they've got some practice. These guys aren't novices. They just didn't pick up these instruments and just start twanging on them. And you've ever heard people that don't know what they're doing in a group play music? It's terrible. It's terrible. I've heard it multiple times, and I promise you, if you haven't heard it, you'll know as soon as you do. It's terrible. Okay. These guys aren't like that. These guys are playing well together, and they're prophesying together. Okay, and so prophesying in this case could be the very same thing as singing a hymn or a psalm. So that's what the commentators say. There's a couple of schools. One thinks this is something like you might find in the Far East, but that's not what's happening here. So these people are singing, and it's a song. And something changes in the heart of Saul, and he joins in, and he's part of that. Okay, and so if we jump down to, so that's what Samuel says is going to happen. Well, then it really happens in verses 10 and 11. So read that. So they came to the hill, and there behold, a group of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God came upon him mightily, so that he prophesied among them. And it came about when all who knew him previously saw that he prophesied now with the prophets. So this is in an area that people are familiar with him and his family, okay? That the people said to one another, "What has happened to the son of Kish? Was Saul among the prophets?" So these people not only know Saul, they know his dad. So these are people that know the family, okay? And verse 12, now the man there answered and said, "Now who is their father?" So they're looking at a group of people. There's at least four guys. Maybe there's more. Maybe there's 20 guys. Okay, and they're doing the singing, playing music thing, and Saul's among them. Well, they know Saul, but they don't know these other guys. So they're not from the area. So who's their father? Therefore, it became a proverb: is Saul also among the prophets? So the prophets is a known group. At this time, the prophets, when they say the prophet is a known group. And they come through the area doing this. This is not, "Wow, Mom, you never believe what I saw." No, because we've seen it before. This is something that happens maybe on a regular basis. And it's been happening for a period of time. Maybe it's been for 20, 30, 40 years. Who knows? Okay? But it's obvious it's been happening for a while, and it's obvious that it's not local guys, that some people gather there for that reason, okay? And they're learning this process, playing music and prophesying, okay? So we'll talk about that on the next video a little bit more. So here's an indication. There's a group of people, a group of prophets, okay? We've been thinking there must be a group of people like this, and now we found them, okay? And so it's in 2 Samuel chapter 10. Okay, so we're going to go to 2 Samuel 16. And we're going to be looking at verses 15 through 18. So 16, 15 through 18 is, so Saul's servants, this is now Saul has been made king, and he's rejected the Lord, and now because he's rejected the Lord, he has this problem, okay? Saul's servants then said to him, behold, an evil spirit from God is terrorizing you. And we could talk the theology of evil spirit from God, okay, sometime. I'm not going to do it now. It'll take a long time. Let our Lord now command your servants who are before you, let them seek a man who is skillful player on the harp. Okay, so whoever these servants are, this isn't an unknown thing to them. They know what you do when you have this problem. They know exactly what to do. They're telling them exactly what you do. Seek a man who is skillful player on the harp, and it shall come about that when the evil spirit from God is on you, that he shall play the harp with his hand, and you will be well. Okay, they're not just throwing this out thinking, maybe this is something that's common. This is what you do. There are people who have this skill of playing in a spiritual sense in such a powerful way that it drives evil spirits away. Now you can't just get your local guys on the corner, maybe, chewing gum and beating out some kind of rhythm over on whatever, and that's going to work. No, this is something. This is spiritual warfare by music. And spiritual warfare by music is not something you just kind of stumble over. In fact, there's a very good likelihood that David, being from Bethlehem, has gone to a school of prophets and learned this. And now he has a reputation. Yeah. So Saul said to his servants, bring this man to me. So let's see what else. So we jump down to verse 23. So it came about whenever the evil spirit from God came to Saul, David, okay, David's the man they found, would take the harp and play it with his hand, and Saul would be refreshed and be well, and the evil spirit would depart from him. So David had learned this spiritual warfare thing, where he could play a kind of music and probably sing a song. And this is probably the beginning. So David has some really nice psalms that seem to come out of this time of his life. Like, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. I mean, that's an amazing shepherding song, very simple, and he's taken the elements of being a shepherd and turning him into a walk with the Lord. And that's pretty insightful. And that's the kind of stuff that was coming out of David's life in his early days. And so he may have been singing the 23rd Psalm that he wrote along with his technique of playing that kind of music he learned. So here's another indication. The school of prophets is affecting people and is having an impact on the community. Okay, so we go on to the next story. 1 Samuel 19. Okay, this is a crazy story. Crazy story. So at the time of Samuel and Saul, Samuel was about 40 years old. So that was about the time he was thinking of not being so active and having his boys take over. Okay, that's one of the things he was thinking. And then the Saul thing came along. Well, Samuel was about 40 years old, okay? So man starts slowing down a little bit, starts focusing on some other stuff, okay? So now David is there. David is starting to prove himself, okay? Maybe that's been a year, maybe two. So Samuel's, a couple of years older. Well, Saul gets totally incensed with David and throws a spear and he's going to kill him. And David runs away, and he doesn't know where else to go. Well, Samuel's the one that anointed him the next king over Israel, so he goes to Samuel. And so that's in 1 Samuel chapter 19. Great story. You need to read the whole chapter, okay? So we're going to start reading 18 to 19. Now David fled and escaped and came to Samuel at Ramah, okay? Ramah is a town on top of a hill again, okay? And told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and stayed at Naioth. Okay? Well, I want to understand this Naioth thing because you're already out of town. And what's this thing they're staying at Naioth? Well, Naioth, you go back into the Hebrew and look at the Hebrew roots of this. This Naoth is a group of buildings. So a Naoth in the singular might be one or a couple, or a duplex maybe, okay? Or kind of like they built a U-shaped courtyard, okay? It's bigger than just a shanty or a little house. It's bigger in the singular, but this is plural. So this means that it's a group or an annex or a complex, and because of its use, it's denoted that it's probably surrounded either by a wall or a hedge. So this isn't just there's 2 or 3 houses down the street. No, this is a thing that's actually a place. It's a place, and it's a group of buildings, and it's surrounded by a wall or a hedge, and it's not part of town, because you can go to the town, and then you have to go to this. So it's maybe sitting off of town. You know how RCC is kind of sitting back in the woods there on the outskirts of Grants Pass. It could be something like that. So it's not right in the town. It's maybe back in the woods or back on the edge of the woods. So separated from town, so it's got its own. It's kind of quiet there and kind of separated. Okay, so you'll see in the story when you read it that Saul can go to Ramah, but he does not see David there because he's the Naoth part of that. And this is, we don't know how big the complex is, but this is a complex. And if this word is associated with the Chaldeans did it. This is a school of instruction. This is an annex for the purpose of instruction. And so this could be like what we call a community college, or small college. So this is an annex, and it's multiple buildings, and it's surrounded by some kind of border, and it's there for the point of instruction. Okay, so now we've come across we moved from, well, there's 2 or 3 guys, maybe 30 guys coming down the hill playing little music over at this area, to we got this sincerely modified version of that. We've got a college. We've got a very complicated place, okay, and this is huge, and so we'll continue reading the story. So we go down to 20 through 24. And Saul sent messengers to take David when they saw the company of the prophets. Now, company is a very large number. It's not like a band. Band might be 6 to 10. This is a company. So if it's military, it could be 40, 60, 80, maybe up to 160. But there's a large group of men. What's going on here? The company of the prophets prophesying, and with Samuel standing and presiding over them. Oh my gosh! So this is a very organized thing. Okay. The Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. So when they walk up on this, they're looking for David, and they walk in. These soldier guys will come walking up. They find this large thing going on, and it's a leader and a group of people. They're doing something very organized, and they're prophesying, okay, in some kind of organized fashion. And these guys are so overwhelmed by the Spirit of God surrounding that or doming over that, they become a part of it. Okay? So the sending the messengers didn't work, so Saul comes himself. He went to Ramah, this is verse 22, came as far as the large well that is in Seku, and he asked, "Where are Samuel and David?" And someone said, "Well, behold, they're at Naoth in Ramah." So he proceeded there to Naoth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God kept on him, also that he went along prophesying continually until he came to Naoth in Ramah, and he stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied before Samuel and lay naked all that night and all that day. Therefore they say is Saul also among the prophets. So that's the location. That's probably the headquarters. Now, if there's a headquarters, that's got to be it. And Samuel's there, and he's in charge of the whole thing. Okay, so Samuel's 40, 45, and that. So this could be his life's work, is building a college at Ramah for this process of learning the scriptures and singing and prophesying the scriptures. Okay, so here we are. This is, I don't know if this is, because we'll see later that it goes all over the place. But anyway, So this is such a powerful thing that God honors it, that David is safe there. Okay, so David, at this moment, we know that he's exposed to prophesying on a large scale, and a very impactful scale. So impactful that not just the people who want to be there are involved in it. If you just come and show up, you're going to be a part of it. And this is never going to leave David's mind. This night is never going to leave David's mind, because he was running for his life, and now he's in this environment. He's completely safe. It doesn't matter what the bad guys want to do; they can't touch him, because the Spirit of God is so strong that it protects him. So I believe that this is the seed that was planted about the tabernacle of David. Okay, and we're going to see more evidence. Okay, so let's see. So we go to 2 Samuel in chapter 6, verse 15. David is now king of Israel. There's another story. There's a story. Oh, okay, it's farther on. Okay, so if you follow along just the storyline of Samuel, Samuel dies, and he dies before David gets to be made king, and we'll do a little backstory on that. So David is now king, and he's king of Judah for 7 years, and then he becomes king of Israel, and so now he wants to do something to unite Israel, and what that's going to be is he wants to unite the people around God again. Okay, he still has a memory of that concert that he was at, a crazy concert, and so now he wants to bring the ark home, and so he does that in 6 Samuel 6:15. You can write it down, but we'll see more of the story in 2 Chronicles 16. He brings the ark to Jerusalem, and a lot of you guys know it took a two-stage thing. The first time Uzzah got killed, and then they brought it the right way. Well, the second time they brought it with men, and they were rejoicing and dancing, and David got in trouble for dancing in public in just his ephod, which is kind of like his underwear, okay? And so his wife didn't like that, and so he kind of got in trouble. But David brings the ark, and he's made a place called David's Tabernacle. Okay, now we're in that place, and you can read about it mostly in 1 Chronicles 16. So read 1 Chronicles 16. You see that David has already made this place. I kind of think of it, he put a stone wall maybe around it and put a floor in it, and then he pitched a tent roof over it. Okay, that's kind of that's my vision from looking at the Hebrew guys when they talk about what's going on there. Okay, and so now the tabernacle is brought there and has a special place way in the back, and then there's singers in the front. He organizes a big song service, and the song service is a combination of 3 of the psalms that he actually publishes in the book of Psalms. So they were like works in progress, and he put some stuff together and did that. And the men that he brought together to do that, they start writing psalms too. They've written a bunch of psalms. Asaph, one of the big writers, his son Solomon will write 1 or 2, and some other guys. So he brings these guys together to do that. Well, if you look at the bringing together of the guys, that happens in 1 Chronicles 25, verse 7. So in 1 Chronicles 25, verse 7, this is not in chronological order so much. The Chronicles is not so good about chronological order. So 1 Chronicles 7. No, 1 Chronicles 25. I'm sorry. 1 Chronicles 25. Okay, here we go. 1 Chronicles 25. So you'll see at the beginning of it that David and the commanders of his army are going to organize some of this. Now that's kind of crazy in my sight. And so there might be like a secret army or something. But anyway, this group of guys get together, and they're going to pick out the guys that are going to be doing the singing. Okay? I need you guys to do this. Okay? So just so you remember, the tabernacle of Moses does not have singing associated with it. Now, There was singing that went along with moving the ark. There was a singing that was associated with that. You don't read about it in the Bible, you see it in other sources, that there was a singing that went with moving the ark. And I think they sang a song or said a saying just before they moved it when they set it down, but there was also some keep the guys kind of focused on what they're doing. They were singing along. But there's not a music associated with what's being performed. The sacrifices and the showbread and all this stuff. There's not singing that goes along with that when Moses starts it out. Okay? Well, there's some evidence that once David becomes king, he institutes that, but the tabernacle is at Jerusalem. He does not take it back to Moses' tabernacle. He takes it to Jerusalem. Okay? And it says that David and the commanders of the army set apart for the service. Okay? So you can read through that part, and you go down to verse 7, and the number who were trained in singing to the Lord, their relatives, all who were skillful, was 288. That's almost 300 people. So you don't just automatically get 300 people, almost 300 people, skilled in music to be a part of this ministry if there's not some place that are learning that stuff. Okay? Because it doesn't come out of Moses' tabernacle. There's not a singing group with that. There's not a singing ministry with that. It's just not there. It came from somewhere else. And I'm saying I believe it came from the school of the prophets. Because God was doing a new thing by getting these prophetic people together and getting them involved in this music. So this is going to actually be the point of revival for many of the kings that will be coming after David, is this, because this is going to turn into the temple, and then in the temple time there's going to be kings that this singing, proclaiming God service kind of thing is going to be the basis of revival. And so we're wanting revival, and in Acts chapter 15, James says that the tabernacle of David is going to be involved in revival in, guess what, the church age. And that's what we're in right now. And we haven't seen too much of that, so maybe it's time for that to happen here in Medford, is what I'm saying. So here we go. We're going to do this, okay? So they're going to do this. Samuel's been dead. He dies at 80 plus years old. So the college that we saw was going for we were there when he was in his 40s. So about at least 40 years that we know about when he was alive. Okay? And now he's dead, and it's been 11 years since he's been dead. So it's not too far-fetched to imagine. Well, that's where all these guys came from. They went there and got training. And now they're ready. Okay? Well, here's the crazy, crazy thing. While Samuel's still alive, we're going to go back in time to 1 Chronicles 9:22. So we go back, 1 Chronicles 9:22. And here's evidence here. Crazy, crazy evidence. Okay, 9:22. So it talks about assigning of the Levites of work to happen around the tabernacle of David. Okay, so there's going to be assignments made. Okay, so that's in 9:22. And all these who were chosen to be gatekeepers, and this is just that part, of the thresholds, and there are going to be other people, going to be guards, and people take care of the cooking stuff, and people take care of the utensils, in their villages, whom David and Samuel the seer appointed in their office of trust. David and Samuel the seer, they arranged all this stuff and wrote all this stuff down. Well, that had to happen when Samuel was still alive. David and Samuel took some time out, and they're making preparations for the tabernacle of David. This has already been planned, at least 11 years ago, probably more, maybe 15 years ago, when Samuel maybe had a little more energy. But this is a time when David's running for his life. He's hiding from Saul. So sometime he came, Samuel say, send him a message, hey, we got to sit down and write this stuff down. So they sit down, and they're preparing this, David and Samuel together, at least 11 years ago, but probably more, for this moment. Okay? And so they're making these decisions about the people they're working with. Well, how do they know these people? Well, guess what? They're probably going to Samuel's college and they're picking them out. Okay? And so here you go. And we go down to verse 33. They've talked about all kinds of things, moving the tent and the furniture and making the frankincense and the spices. And now these are the singers. Well, they've never had singers before. There's never been singers associated with the worship of God. And these are the singers, the heads of the father's household, the Levites, who lived in the chambers of the temple, free from other service, for they're engaged in the work day and night. This has been planned for years. David and Samuel were catching the vision from the Lord, and we're working on it while they're both still alive. This is years in the past. Well, this is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. Okay, so now we're going to look at how some of this continues on, the evidence. So the first song they sing. Okay, we're going to go to 1 Kings now. 1 Kings. And 1 King 18:4. We're going to roll through these really fast. 1 King 18:4. Let's see. 1 Kings 18:4. Okay, we go. So 1 Kings 18:4. So it came about when Jezebel and Ahab are there, okay, and they're gonna set up the worship of Baal and Asherah. Okay? And so what does she do? It came about when Jezebel destroyed the prophets of the Lord. Okay? And Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave and provided them with food and water. Okay? So however many prophets there were, 100 of them got saved. Maybe there was 5 or 6, 700 of them. Who knows? Okay? So just in the next story, where they have the conflict, there's 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. Well, that's 850 men. Okay, so it's not a big deal to have a whole bunch of prophets around. Well, it's time. They take up arms against them, start killing them. Well, Obadiah saves 100 of them. Okay, so that means it's not insignificant. This group of prophets is not an insignificant number in this time period. Okay, so 1 Kings 20, 35. Now a certain man of the sons of the prophets said to another by the word of the Lord, "Please strike me," but the man refused to strike him. Then he said to him, "Because you have not listened to the voice of the Lord, behold, as soon as you have departed from me, a lion will kill you." And as soon as he had departed from him, the lion had found him and killed him. Oh my gosh. There's guys working the prophetic still in the time of Ahab. Okay? And then we look at verse 41. He hastily took the bandage away from his eyes, and the king of Israel recognized that he was of the prophets. Now, I don't know what it was about their looks. He looked at him and said, "Wait a minute, I know who you are. You're one of the prophets." So this group is still functioning and doing stuff and challenging the king right here. Challenging the king, okay? All right. So that was 20. So we're now going to go to 2 Kings 2, verse 3. Verse 3. Now the sons of the prophets who were at Bethel, well, wait a minute. They were all at Ramah at one time. Well, here's a town called Bethel, and here's a bunch of the prophets there. So they've made satellite schools. Okay? So there's a school of prophets now at Bethel. Okay? So we're going down to verse 5. And the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho, well, good grief. So we got Ramah now, and Bethel, and Jericho. Okay? And so this thing's exploding. It's all over the place. Okay? So they approach Elijah. They're part of that story of Elijah being taken away. And by the way, he doesn't get taken to heaven. He gets taken to another place. Okay, and there's a reason for that, and maybe sometime we'll talk about that. Okay, but that's disciples going deeper. Okay, so here we are. We not only have the college at Ramah, we have Bethel, we have Jericho. Okay, so 1 Kings 4:22. Okay, so this is a story of the Shunammite woman. I don't know if you guys remember the Shunammite woman. She made the little home for Elisha, a little room, so that he could be there. And they noticed that she didn't have any children, so they pronounced that she'd have children. Okay, that's one of the things that the prophets with this quotation marks can do. They can get a woman have children when she couldn't have children before. Anyway, she has this child, and you guys know the story. The child dies one day. And so, verse 22, she called to her husband and said, "Please send me a servant, one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and return." Well, the man of God was what they knew Elisha as at the time. And he was the head of the group of prophets, okay? And he said, "Why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath." And she said, "It will be well." Okay, so he's not too much of a hands-on kind of dad, and so she's going to take care of this herself. But look at that. He knows that she goes to see the prophet, and at a school of prophets, most likely, on new moon and Sabbath. Well, that means they're having some kind of assembly, some kind of program, some kind of church thing, where they're getting together on those days, and the prophet is teaching the community. Okay, and the man knows about it. Obviously, he doesn't go. Okay, the wife goes. It's just like today, but he knows about it. Okay, but she's going to go there, and so she went to the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came about when the man of God saw her at a distance, he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Yonder is the Shunammite." So in this story, the young boy, eventually gets his life back in the thing. But we see that now there's a group of prophets probably at Carmel. Okay, so now we got Ramah, we got Bethel, we got Jericho, we got Mount Carmel. Okay, let's see what else we find. Jeremiah 4 verse 38. Then Elisha returned to Gilgal. There was a famine in the land, as the sons of the prophets were sitting before him. What? Another group of the sons of prophets are now in Gilgal? Okay, well how big is that group? Well, we turn down farther in the story. Now a man came from Baal Shalishah and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, fresh ears of grain in a sack, and he said, "Give them to the people that they may eat." And his attendant said, "What shall I set this before 100 men?" 100 men. We're talking about the school of prophets in Gilgal. 100 men. Wow. Okay, this is not an insignificant thing. Okay, this is a power. So now we have Ramah and Bethel and Jericho and Mount Carmel and Gilgal. Okay. So in another story in 522, it's next one over. So this is when Naaman comes and he is healed, and when he wants to go away, the servant Gehazi wants a little bit of the loot, so he comes up with the story. And he said, so he pursues Naaman in verse 21, and Naaman saw him running after, and he came down from the chariot to meet him and said, "Is all well?" And he said, "Well, all is well, but my master sent me and said, Behold, 2 young men of the sons of the prophets have come to me from the hill country of Ephraim." Well, there's another group now. So that's north of Ramah, the hill country of Ephraim. So these schools of prophets are everywhere. Okay, and so then chapter 6, verse 1 through 2. Now the sons of the prophets said to Elisha, "Behold, the place before you where we're living is too limited. Please let us go to the Jordan, and each of us take a beam, and let us make a place for ourselves where we may live." So he said, "Go." So they're now, and this is a place close to the Jordan River. Well, that's Jericho. And what's the problem? Is it getting smaller? No, it's growing out of proportion. There's not a place for everybody to stay. So they're going to go down and get some little trees down there, probably poplar trees or maybe alder trees, and they don't get huge, and so you can cut them into poles and make another place to stay. And so the school of Jericho is growing. So there's a little bit more. That's just some incidental stuff. Let's see, 6:1 and 2. That was that. 9:1. 9:1. Okay, so Elisha the prophet called one of the sons of the prophets and said to him, "Gird up your loins and take this flask and go to Ramoth Gilead." So I'm not really sure. I didn't look that up. So he's still using the boys to work. In 17:13. 17:13. So this is winding up the history of Israel, just about to go into captivity. And yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and every seer, saying, Turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments, my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, which I sent to you through my servants the prophets. That's one of the pictures of what these prophetic men are supposed to do. If you look at it, they're not supposed to come up with a new message. This is the same message from God that came from Moses. When you go into the land, you're supposed to do the things that I told you to do in the book of Moses. To turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments, my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers. So they aren't there making up new stuff. This is just basic law of God. That's what all these prophet guys are all learning. And then they would go out and share it. And that's how God wanted to hold his name and to bring his people into an understanding of the presence. So just to wind this up, the schools and communities of the prophets became one of God's major tools to bring the people. And when he looked back and he said, you guys don't have an excuse because you have the tabernacle of Moses. No, that's not what he said. He said, look back because you had the tabernacle of David. No, that's not what he said. He says, you had the prophets, and they were out working around you. The prophets are what was holding the nation together spiritually. Okay? And that's what I'm saying today. We need that same group of people today with us. I think God needs to raise up the New Testament prophets. I think that's what it is. And then be a community so they can hold each other in check. The reality is, Ahab had 400 false prophets who proclaimed to know the will of God. Okay? And other kings will have false prophets. Well, out of the schools of prophets obviously came the false prophets. Well, it's just like in the New Testament, John says that the Antichrist had gone out and they went out from the church. Okay? So the evil one has a way of taking good things and perverting them and turning them into something terrible. But so a self-policing group of prophets, we see a group like that in the New Testament, the book of Acts. They actually gather together as a group of prophets and teachers, men who are working with the Word of God, getting it out to the people. And they gather together and fast and pray because they know there's something coming. They know there's something that needs to happen next. And they're praying, seeking the Lord on that. And they came up to separate Paul and Barnabas and send them out as apostles. So these kind of men are the ones God uses to break new ground and to get new territory and to do new things. So out of the commission. So anyway, so I'm praying about God raising up the prophets and creating a community of prophets right here in the Rogue Valley. And then out of that, we can have join that up with the Tabernacle of David. And we're still praying about revival, and I believe it's just around the corner. It's in God's heart, it's in God's mind. And so we're just waiting for his watch to say it's time. God bless you all.